Today I will explain you about event handling in Java. Now what are events? The events are the objects that define state change in a source. So we do have some sources, nothing but components which can generate some events. Like we have a button, checkbox, radio button, list box, choice control. So like this we do have so many sources, nothing but components which can generate some events. So if that particular status of the particular component has been changed, then the event could arise. So whenever I press a button, the event is generated. When I select a checkbox, when I deselect a checkbox, when I select an item, now these are the cases where the state of the particular source is going to change. So then the event occurs. An event can be generated as a reaction of a user while interacting with GUI elements. So as I listed out, we do have some checkbox. Let's suppose I click a checkbox. Then that implies that a user is trying to interact with the checkbox and just they are clicking the particular component. That is called as user interaction. So let's suppose I select some radio button. That is also user interaction. When I click a button, that is also user interaction. So whenever a user is interacting with GUI elements, an event can be generated. Some of the event generation activities are moving the mouse pointer. So I'm moving the mouse like this. There's also an event. We have a mouse event. Then clicking on a button, pressing the keyboard key, then selecting an item from the list box, and so on. So these are few examples of generating an event. The events may also occur that may be not related to user interaction, such as a timer expires, counter exceeded, system failures, or a task is complete, etc. So there will be some sort of events where the user is not interacting, still the event occurs. Suppose a timer expires, so whenever we put a counter, like if once it has been reaching, the counter is reaching to 0, then we need to do some action. So those sort of things can also be coming under the events. Now we have some classes for the events. At the root of the Java and event class hierarchy is event object. Now this is the topmost class for all events, which is in util package. Now it is a superclass for all events. Now it has only one constructor. So we have an event object, that the constructor, and we have a one parameter constructor where we are writing object. Now this SRC is the object that generates this event. So whatever the component which is generating an event, that is becoming the object source. Now we have one more class, AWT event is a superclass of all AWT events that are handled by the delegation event model. So when you talk about delegation event model, we have a source and listener concept. So we'll see that in the further slides, but when you go for all event handling in AWT abstract window toolkit, then we have a superclass called AWT event exclusively for AWT events. Now this is the hierarchy of event classes. So on the top you can see event object, then its subclass is AWT event, its subclass is action event, adjustment event, component event, item event. Then we have a component event, we have focus event subclass, input event, paint event, and window event. Under the input event, again keyboard event or key event or mouse event. Under the mouse event, we have mouse wheel event. So these are all the classes, and these are hierarchies from which class the other class has been derived. So we'll see when does this events arises. If suppose I take action event, it is generated when a button is pressed, or a list item is double clicked, or a menu item is selected. So these are all the possible cases. So when I click a particular button like OK, cancel, login, submit, reset, now these are the buttons what you generally see, then the action event is generated. So in the list item, the list box, we have a list items. If I click a list item, double click, then we have an action event. If you go for single click, still we have the item event generated. So one component, more than one event can be generated. Or when you select a menu item, then also the action event is generated. Suppose if you take file, edit, these are all the menus. If you take file, we have new, open, and all this. Those are menu items. If I click that menu item, then action event is generated. Then we have the adjustment event. Now this is generated when a scroll bar is manipulated. So you do have the vertical scroll bar at the right hand side and the horizontal scroll bar at the bottom. So you try to adjust the particular window through the scroll bar, then the adjustment event is generated. So component event is generated when a component is hidden, moved, resized, or becomes visible. So component could be anything like checkbox, radio button, list box. Then we have a button, text field. So if I hide the component on screen, or if I move the component, if I resize the component, or if I show the component on the applet window or the frame window, which is nothing but a container, then we can see component event is generated. Then we have container event. The container event is nothing but a frame window or applet window is called as a container. So if I add one component to that particular container, or I remove the component from the container, then this event is generated. Generated when a component is added to or removed from a container. Focus event is there, generated when a component gains or loses keyboard focus. So let's suppose you have a text field. I put a cursor in the text field. That means the text field has gained the focus. Then the event is generated. If I remove that particular cursor from one text field and I put into the next text field or any other component, then one component is losing the focus, the other component is gaining the focus. Then input event. Now this input event is an abstract superclass for all component input event classes like key event, mouse event, or those are the input event classes. Then item event is generated when a checkbox or list item is clicked. So checkbox and list item was single click, and also occurs when a choice selection is made. Choice selection is nothing but a drop down list. We select only one item from that, or a checkable menu item is selected or deselected. So as I said, menus are containing menu items like new, open, cut, copy, paste. So there we have an option like we have a checkbox before the menu item. If you can see any menu item with a checkbox before the menu item label, then that is called a checkable menu item, because once you click, you get a tick mark, that is check mark. Once again you click the same thing, it will be off. Then key event is generated when input is received from the keyboard, like when you press the key on the keyboard, when you release the key, as well as when you type the characters through the keyboard. Then key event is generated. When mouse event generated when the mouse is dragged, or the mouse is moved, then mouse we click, then mouse is pressed or released, and also generated when the mouse enters or exits a component. So onto the applet window, if you place the mouse, that is called entered. You remove the mouse from the applet window or the frame window of the container, then it calls exits a component. Then mouse wheel event generated when the mouse wheel is moved. Then text event generated when the value of a text area or text field has been changed. Then window event generated when the window is activated, that is enabled, then closed, deactivated, de-iconified, iconified. Iconified is nothing similar to minimization. De-iconified is nothing but restoring to the original status, that is maximization. Then open the window or quit the window. So these are some event classes, and what type of events at which type or which component is generating we have seen. Then coming to the event sources. A source is an object that generates an event. Suppose button, if I click a button, action event is generated. Now that is the button is called as a source. This occurs when the internal state of the object changes in some way. Like if I take checkbox and I click that, then the checkbox, you get a check mark there. So the status of the checkbox is changed, right? So sources may generate more than one type of event. So if you see the list box, list item is, if you double click, action event is generated. If you go for single click, item event is generated. So like that. So one source, more than one type of event. And a source must register listeners in order for the listeners to receive notifications about specific type of event. So when you go for event handling, we talk about sources and listeners. Listeners are nothing but the interfaces available here. So sources are nothing but the components. So whenever a particular component is raising an event through the event classes, that intimation or the notification to be sent to the listeners. So the listeners need to listen to that and execute their abstract methods available in the listener interface. That's called action. So the listener need to register themselves at the source side, because whoever are registered at the source side only get the notification. Just like publisher and subscriber. Subscribers are the people who are registering at the publisher, and whenever the publisher is publishing some data, it only receives by the subscribers only, not the other people. Similar to that, here the listeners need to register themselves. Now, how to register? So each type of event has its own registration methods. Suppose if I take action event. When a button is pressed, action event is generated. Then I need to give the notification to the action listener. So how to register the action listener is nothing but here you can write public void. This is the syntax. Add type listener. Now in place of type, you need to write action. Suppose if you have a key event, then you can see example add key listener you write. If you go for mouse event, add mouse listener we need to write. Okay, if you go for window event, we need to write add window listener. If you go for action event, add action listener. So this is used for registering the listener. If you don't want the listener, you want to unregister, still there is a method. In place of add, you need to write remove type listener. And yet that's reference type listener reference here also. So here we need to write remove type listener. So which listener you want to remove, that you need to write the reference here. So suppose here I'm removing the key listener I've added, key listener I'm removing. Mouse listener I've added, mouse listener I'm removing by using remove mouse listener method. Now coming to the event sources. So button is there. It is generating what type of event? Action event when button is pressed. Checkbox is another source. Generates item events when the checkbox is selected or deselected. Choice control is nothing but drop down list. Generates item events when the choice is changed. Like from one value to the other value are changing. Selection is changed. Then list is nothing but list box. Generates action events when an item is double clicked. Generates item events when an item is selected or deselected. That is single click. Menu item is one more component. Generates action events when a menu item is selected. Generates item events when a checkable menu item is selected or deselected. Then scroll bar for the adjustment events we have seen. Generates adjustment events when the scroll bar is manipulated. Then text components generates text events when the user enters a character. Text component implies what? Text field and text area. Window is one more source. It generates window events when the window is activated, closed, deactivated, de-iconified, opened, or quit. Now these are the sources which are generating the events. Now coming to the listeners. Now a listener is an object that is notified when an event occurs. So only the registered listeners will get the notification whenever the event is raised. See, it has two major requirements. First, it must have been registered with one or more sources to receive notifications about specific types of events. So that's what I was saying. The listeners need to register themselves at the source side by using add type listener method. Second, it must implement methods to receive and process these notifications. Because whenever we give a notification like the button is raised so and so event, like action event, action listener is getting notified, and the action listener is having one abstract method called action performed, which is handling action event, need to be executed, and that logic what you are going to write inside action performed is the action to be performed. So all listeners are interfaces, all events are classes. So it must all the abstract methods which are inside the listener interfaces to be implemented. So that is why the second point, it must implement methods to receive and process these notifications. Now all event related classes like action event, item event, then window event, whatever you have seen earlier, and interfaces like action listener. For action event, action listener is there, key event, key listener, window event, window listener, mouse event, mouse listener, like that are there. Those are interfaces. All are available under a package called java.aw.event package. So here these are the few listeners. So action listener defines one method to receive action events. That is, there is one abstract method called action performed. Adjustment listener defines one method to receive adjustment events. That is, adjustment value change method is available. Component listener defines four methods, abstract methods, to recognize when a component is hidden, moved, resized, and shown. Like component hidden, component moved, component resized, and component shown are the methods. Then container listener is having two methods for adding and removing the component. We have component added and component removed methods. Focus listener define two methods to recognize when the component gains or loses keyboard focus. We have focus gain and focus loss methods. Item listener defines one method to recognize when the state of an item changes. That is, we have an abstract method called item state change, one method. Then key listener defines three methods to recognize when a key is pressed, key released, and key typed. We have three abstract methods like key pressed, key released, and key typed. Then mouse listener defines five methods to recognize when the mouse is clicked, enters a component, exits a component, it pressed, and released. So we have method like mouse clicked, mouse entered, mouse exited, mouse pressed, and mouse released. Then mouse motion listener defines two methods to recognize when the mouse is dragged or moved. We have methods like mouse dragged or mouse moved. So two methods are available. Mouse wheel listener defines one method to recognize when the mouse wheel is moved. So we have mouse wheel moved method. Text listener defines one method to recognize when the text value changes. Like we have one method called text changed as an abstract method. Window focus listener defines two methods to recognize window gains or loses input focus. So we have window gained focus, window lose focus as a two methods. Then window listener, we have 7 methods to recognize when a window is activated, closed, deactivated, iconified, opened, or quit. Like window activated, window deactivated, window iconified, window deiconified, window opened, window closed, window closing. Like that, we have few methods for the window listener. So there all the listeners are interfaces. You can see the heading here, and all are having its respective abstract methods. So whenever we write like public class name implements listener name, you need to define those methods inside that class. Now if you can see here, event classes, sources, and listeners. So if you take action event is generated when button is pressed, menu item is selected, list item is doubled, etc. We have an action listener for that. Key event, we have key listener, and keys are pressed, release, and type. These are the things times which the key event is generated. The mouse event is pressed, release, mouse is pressed, release, clicked, moved, dragged, entered, and exited a component. So mouse listener is there. For mouse wheel event, mouse wheel listener is there. Item event, item listener. Text event, text listener. Window event, window listener. Component event, component listener. Container event, container listener. Adjustment event, adjustment listener. Focus event, focus listener. Now these are all things already we have seen, but you need to understand what type of event, what type of listeners are existing. Now here we have a delegation event model. So what I was explaining, the sources, listeners, and classes. So we have an event source which is generating an event like button, checkbox, radio button, and all these things, right? It invokes the method and gets notified. So here, whenever it is going for event source, it creates the event object, and it need to pass that to the listener and to the only the listeners which have been registered already. You can see registered at the source. So that's what I was saying. The listener objects need to be registered at the source side. So only those listener objects only we are trying to notify the events, whatever the event source are generated. So event source invokes onto the listener object, or event source is creating its own event object, the new event object, and then also it is being invoked on the listener object. Now the listener object need to handle the event, and it need to give the information to the listener. The listener is going to execute its abstract methods where the actual actions are provided. So listener object is implementing, because it's an interface, it's implementing the listener interface, and what all abstract methods you have written in the particular class which are implemented need to be executed. So the abstract methods logic is called the actual action. Okay, so suppose button is clicked, the button is a source here, and it is giving the information to the like event source is generating what type of event, action event. So the action event is given to the action listener object. That action listener is object is going to give to the action listener interface, and the listener interface is holding an abstract method called action perform that to be executed. Okay, so here the source is generating an event and delegating its task to the listener object, so that the listener is going to do the rest of the work. That is called delegating, means assigning the work. Okay, so here the understanding point is you need to register the listener at the event source. Only those listeners need to get the notification, otherwise the other people will not get. I hope all of you have understood this event handling in Java. So if you like this video, please subscribe and share it to your friends. Thank you.